When I played sports in college, they had us take a concussion pretest where you had to do things like memorize a list of words and then recite it back. And then if you got hit on the head, they saw if you got worse at those tasks. So is that mental impairment the definition of a concussion or just one possible symptom? And how good are those tests at detecting concussions and then seeing when people are recovered from them afterwards?
So the cognitive changes that you might pick up on a post-concussion test is a symptom, not a definition of. You actually spoke very nicely about some of the challenges and diversity of how a concussion is defined. And it is quite broad, but generally agreed that if there's just a momentary alteration in your mental status, that counts. And there may or may not be any cognitive symptoms following that.
But if you can't recite words that you could beforehand, that seems to be a bad sign. I'm no expert.
If you have symptoms on the sideline, and again, this is an approach that's widely used in collegiate athletics, and I think it's a good one. If someone is doing less well after a hit than they were at the beginning of the year, it's a problem. What was interesting about that whole approach, though, is that a lot of the players knew that this was going to be an issue, a lot of college players, so they dumbed it down at baseline so that it wasn't quite so obvious that they had a hit.
Hi. So this is semi-related to that question, but basically I believe in putting investment in doing prevention, treatment, and diagnosis. But it comes back to the basic cultural policies of this. So we know that NFL and NHL players will kind of fake their pre-cognitive exam so that if they do get a concussion, they don't seem to be subpar. So in all senses, concussions are bad, but it's more bad for the player. So how do we remove the penalization? Because if you admit to having a concussion, you're taken out. And if you're at school and you're trying to get scholarship, the less games you play, the less time you're going to get seen, and you're not going to do well. And everyone that plays the sports wants to be there. They want to be part of that. So how can we do it so that if people admit to having concussions, they get removed, but it's actually a pro, so they prevent the secondary injuries. So it's almost like they get rewarded for the admittance of having a concussion. So you remove the stigma, and also the insurance companies, if people know that you've had concussions, both professional and general population, you're much harder to get insurance. So it's kind of a perpetuating a negative cycle. So how do we change that, and how do we aim for the policies to try and move it into a more positive manner?
I think it's a great question. I don't have the answer.
I think a little bit about what you were saying with the idea of, maybe there being the ability to have a hit count, versus in baseball, if you're a pitcher, you have a pitch count, and when you get to a certain number, it's kind of accepted that you might be done for the day. So, but I think, you can't have any sort of hit count until you're measuring hits in a way that you can believe in, I guess.
But maybe there will be a snap count or something in football eventually, or something like that.
Maybe if players were rewarded for having a concussion.
Yes.
and in the sense that, they admit to it, they're screened and they're off.
Well, I will say
it's not seen as a negative.
Yeah.
Your question is a great one because it's a huge, huge issue. And people like Derek Boogaard and everybody in sports, and especially I think for like an enforcer in the NHL, it's the lowest paid guy already. They're one punch away from getting demoted to the minor leagues and having their salary cut by 90%. And Derek punched out one guy, and the guy was back in the minor leagues for 4 years, was demoted and didn't make it back to the NHL for 4 years. Those guys are not going to admit to a concussion or any sort of injury at all. They're loath to admit to it. I think we've seen, at least, again, with the kids and stuff, we're starting to realize we want to encourage them to come forward and admit to these. And I would like to think that that culture doesn't exist so much at the lower levels, but I know the practicality is at the college level, at the pro level. Yeah, if a coach says, wow, she's been concussed 3 or 4 times, maybe it's time that, I find another player. I don't know how you get around that. There's always going to be that thing in the back of your mind where you think, maybe I just won't say anything, and that's a scary way to live.
Yeah, if we can determine that some of these, acceleration sensors that can be worn out on the field are reliable predictors of the actual neurological trauma, then maybe we don't give kids a choice. You detect it, it gets wired to the sideline, you identify, and you're out. And that might actually be required to be in compliance with these LISTET laws. We're not there yet, but yeah, that's a big problem.
Maybe scholarships are guaranteed, maybe contracts are guaranteed, so at least if nothing else, you've got your education there, you're not going to get cut from the team and lose you. Yeah, well, as you say.
I mean,
you should be
I
rewarded somehow.
knew someone who, she was a hockey player, but field hockey, and she had multiple concussions, and so she was removed, but she came back and she was brilliant, but no one would pick her up because she'd had this past
It's a
history.
stigma, yeah.
And everyone wants to have a team that has the best players, and so you don't want a player that may be susceptible. So again, it comes back to our culture. We all want our teams to win, so we want to have the best players. But if we put someone fourth and later on they're going to have health disadvantages, it's...
And I realize we're probably running out of time a little bit, but we all saw it here in the Bay Area with Steve Young 15 years ago, right? He had been concussed X number of times, and then teams were... John Brody, yeah, go back, all these guys that have had concussions, and then there's always like one team that maybe they'll take a chance on him. I covered the Broncos at the time that Mike Shanahan wanted to bring Steve Young back and play, and everyone said he's had a bunch of concussions. But there's always one team that might bring him back, but most people are like, no, it's damaged goods. They're disposable parts, and that's the sad part of sports in a lot of ways.
Thank you.
Time for just a couple more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, is there any data or any evidence that if you have lower force hits over time, that more lower force hits can generate a concussion, a diagnosed concussion? That means that they accumulate over time, and even a lower force hit would generate an effect that you wouldn't have if you didn't have the previous lower force hit history. Like, mechanically, instead of breaking a piece of wood with one big blow, working at it. Is there any data on that?
So there's a little bit data. It doesn't prove exactly your point, but so in fact, I think the biggest risk factor, at least in a study I can think of, actually a colleague of ours at University of North Carolina, showed that the single biggest risk factor, if I'm not remembering it properly, for concussion was a prior concussion. So there is some sense that you're now at a higher risk. If that's a mechanical issue, I have no idea. It very well could be. It could be a biological issue. There's the thought that there's a period in which you have kind of a metabolic crisis. There might be inflammation. That might make you more susceptible. It may not be mechanical. It also might be people that are more likely to self-report. It's hard to say, but there is a notion that after you get a concussion, you're more likely to get another one.
And a
there's
quick
data
follow-on
behind that.
for the neurologist. Are the tests today fine enough to detect impairments which are below concussion level? Let's say you are honest with your baseline. As a kid, probably you are. Are there tests which are fine enough that you would detect subconcussive hits, where some of these connections are strained, but you still function well, instead of this binary type of level of the impact test and other diagnoses?
It's a tough one to answer because I don't think we have a gold standard. So there are, there are 1 to 2 million mild traumatic brain injuries every year that occur in this country. And I would say that in 98% of those instances, after 6 months, you don't see any indication or marker of that injury. The scan looks good, the cognition looks good, everything looks good. Is there evidence for something that's not being picked up because our measures aren't sensitive enough? I don't think we really know.
There have been a few recent studies, and I don't know how trustworthy they are, and there's only a few. It takes a lot of research to really prove something definitively in high school football players where asymptomatic, no diagnosed concussion, there are a couple of groups that have found changes in measures of fMRI, so it's a kind of functional measure of MRI, as well as changes in these kind of fiber tracks in terms of how the water diffuses. But there's only a couple little small studies, and honestly, a lot of these imaging studies, I'm not an imaging person, over time, as they come out, they seem to conflict with each other more often than agree. So, I wouldn't take that as anything definitive.
Is there?
Actually, I was going to ask it individually, but I was just curious whether you were taking any volunteers for any of the studies. I'm
didn't get
an
the
amateur
question.
athlete. I actually play
Taking
hockey
any
4 times a
volunteers
week,
for
so.
studies?
Volunteers?
For any studies?
Oh, we're always happy to take retired athletes who want to join our research. That would be, so absolutely.
I wasn't so much referring to retired as still active as a beer league, if you will.
Beer league.
Because there are 4,000 of us who play hockey over here at Ice Center, so
Yeah,
in my mind, it would be a much more important question to answer in terms of what it affects, how it affects just your amateur athletes.
A colleague of mine has an open study, Department of Defense open study. Of course, studies have exclusion criteria, but I'd be happy to talk to you after the fact and tell you a little more. And if there's he's actually enrolling right now. It's a big study. So, if you're any kind of group of colleagues might fit, I'm happy to chat with you afterwards.
I think that was a terrific question to end on. Thanks for offering yourself and your buddy. So let's thank all of our speakers, our moderator, and our speakers tonight. And we'd like to thank you with the highly coveted Café Scientifique mug. So thanks again, and we hope
Awesome.
to see you all again in January at our next cafe. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.